Is Chrysler finally going out of business? With 40% of its overall value lost in recent years, 16-17% decline in sales just in 24 alone, and the fact that Carlos Tavares was turfed, kicked to the corner just because of some of the decisions by some of the other brands like Chrysler, Dodge, Ram, Jeep. The idea to go electrification meant that a lot of these brands, of course, had a limited future, a smaller market from loyalists, and certainly a short future. Things aren't looking so good for Chrysler these days as they only have one vehicle, and it's essentially a minivan. What does the future look like for Chrysler? After forecasts reported that Chrysler was looking at burning off another $10.6 billion in projected revenue in 2025, things weren't looking very good. And when you think about minivans, nobody's thinking Chrysler anymore. I mean, there was a time in the heyday, they were essentially the beginning of that space. Chrysler, Dodge, of course, they created the little minivan, the Grand Voyager, the Grand Caravans that we know today. But it feels like that market has shrunk. The market's drastically reduced, and even the few people that still are looking for minivans are not really thinking Dodge anymore. They're not thinking Chrysler. Why do you think Walter Chrysler is rolling in his grave? It's literally because there's one vehicle left, and it's a minivan. Chrysler was once known as one of these brands that was very sort of plush, upscale, almost in line with those of Cadillac. And if you can believe it, they've absolutely sunk to the bottom of the barrel. Things were so dire, in fact, last year, a grandson allegedly was looking at potentially trying to rally enough money and funds to buy the company back and try to build something. But as we all know, it takes billions, not millions, billions of dollars, and it takes a really sharp business mind to keep a car manufacturer making money. Unfortunately, when we look at Chrysler, we think, Dodge, Ram, Jeep. And while Stellantis has struggled over the course of the last few years, largely because of their overinflated prices, stale product line, and unfortunately reliability that's enough to choke a horse. When we're thinking about things like the TIPM and the totally integrated power module flaking out, and a lot of these cars having electrical gremlins, transmissions, catastrophic engine failures. As a matter of fact, I know somebody personally who has a Jeep Grand Cherokee and had to dump about 12 grand into fixing their engine because it just blew up literally 2 months after the warranty expired. So it doesn't build a brand confidence, and Stellantis has struggled with that. Now, if a vehicle was cheap, then people accept that. They're like, okay, it's cheap, it's throwaway, I'm good with that. I'll buy it, I'll run it as long as it goes, and we'll toss it. But the problem is Jeep, Ram, Chrysler included in the minivan are brands that are all quite substantially priced. And sadly enough, to help pay and fund the transformation into electrification, which Carlos Tavares tried when he came on board just shortly after 2020-21, he came on board and his idea was, even though he was well respected in the industry, he thought he was going to get ahead of the game, transform into electrification. Even with products like the Jeep Recon, which was essentially a Wrangler that's electrified, nobody's going to do that. Who's going to plug into a tree? It's just not feasible. We've seen the catastrophic failures in terms of sales for some of their bigger Jeep products that have gone pure EV. Even their Chargers, Challengers, failures. And it's quite obvious that the North American market's not entirely ready for the electric space. No, they want good old-fashioned American muscle. And so now, after Carlos Tavares has so gracefully departed, now it looks like the new CEOs are on course to try to make some changes, try to build up brand reputation, credibility. But how do you do that? Well, with a Chrysler, what do you do with that? That almost feels like you have to amalgamate it with something else, because with one vehicle, nobody wants it. If you're thinking minivan, most people now are going to consider a Toyota Sienna, maybe a Honda. A lot of those vehicles have the reputation. Minivans now have a little of this association with being sort of nerdy, soccer mom. Nobody wants minivans. If they need the hauling space for people, kids, families, they usually go to SUVs now, and there's a lot of SUVs, particularly in the mid-size. Highlanders and Yukons. You think of all of these larger SUVs that have third row. You no longer have a space for a minivan because it's sort of related to sort of nerdiness, and most people just, even though they find them practical, in some cases, under their breath, are finding it almost embarrassing to openly admit that they drive a minivan. When's the last time you got cut off in traffic? chances are it was by one of two vehicles, a BMW or possibly a Chrysler minivan. And that's been my personal experience. And quite often what I've seen is, husbands that were forced to buy a minivan, generally by Chrysler, are kind of upset with the world as a whole. And now they're taking it out on other drivers by driving like, well, you know the rest. So unfortunately, it just does not have the brand recognition anymore that it once did. The clout is no longer there. The smoke has finally settled, and it may in fact be time to let this horse to pasture. See, unfortunately, Chrysler as a brand just doesn't have what it takes anymore. The staying power is not there, the reliability is not there, and even with the latest, with the Pentastar, those things, okay, it has a little bit of an improvement. We know we go back a couple of generations, bad transmissions, slipping transmissions, engines, oil consumption, and problems just meant people just lost confidence over the years. But how do you build a brand? One minivan does not make a brand. And so there's been lots of talk about a lot of these brands getting parted out. Stellantis has struggled, and a lot of people have said maybe it's time for them to either sell brands off, amalgamate, combine. I mean, what could it be, a Dodge Caravan instead? Go back to the old Dodge and get rid of Chrysler altogether? Absolutely, that could possibly be. If they like the minivan in the repertoire, maybe they have to look at combining it and basically scrapping the name, or vice versa. But that said, Dodge is failing too. The only vehicle there that's kind of holding a smidge of success is the Durango. And even the Durango is a bit old vanilla yogurt. The Durangos really aren't that spectacular. Sure, there's some fleet vehicles borrowing the Durango for some of their efforts. Rental car companies love them because they have the size. But the vast majority of retail buyers are strictly not going to even Durangos. So they are selling. There's a bit of a sliver of hope. But Dodge, what else do they have? Well, they have that hot little vehicle that's essentially an Alfa Romeo Tonale. That's right. But nobody's looking for that either. And and as well, on top of the Charger and the Challenger are also flops right now. So they're looking, Stellantis, at getting those refitted and outfitted with V8 engines. Allegedly, the talk, they're going to likely come back. But even the Hemi wasn't selling all that well. And you think back in 2018, 2019, and before all this talk about electrification, honestly, the sales were in the proverbial toilet. So Dodge as a whole, this is a short-term vision, in my own personal opinion, a short-term vision just to shake a little bit of excitement back into the brand. But sales were down. Nobody was buying Challengers, Chargers. Nobody's buying Chrysler products. And unfortunately, we know the financial issues that Stellantis is faced with these days. Trying to recoup funds, trying to manage companies like Fiat and Alfa Romeo and Maserati mean that sales are brutal in North America. They're having to make decisions there too. So because it's all one big pot of money, the decision is, where do we put those investment dollars? Where do we invest that capital? It's probably not going to be a Chrysler minivan. And if you are like me, and I have been known to be a bit of a betting man, I would go out on a limb and say that it won't be very long and Chrysler may in fact wave bye-bye. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. With all that said, be sure to drop a line. What do you think? Do you think Chrysler's got the staying power? Do you think there's any future for the brand? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Bye-bye.